spies risked their lives daily. They would spend their days disguised as other people and had to be very cautious not to break character. Spies listened in on conversations of influential people, politicians, and army leaders. Confederate spies actually spied on Washington. Confederate spies belonged to a formal intelligence organization, while the Union did not have a formal espionage unit, although espionage played a crucial role in the war for both sides.
Espionage was not a crime under civilian laws of the United States, so therefore you were allowed to be paid as a spy. Some spies actually made more or as much as military officers, and it did not matter your gender back then, even though there was a whole women don't get to do this and that thing going on. You could be a spy and get paid as much. And women spies, if they were a spy and their husband was on the battlefield or was a spy himself, they would get paid a widow's pension fee of $12 a month separately than what they actually got paid. The typical full-time civilian spy was actually paid about $2 a day, and if they wanted to make more, they had the opportunity to by possibly asking if they could do something extra than they were allowed to or supposed to try to get them more information. And if they did well at this and they actually got more information, they could be paid $3 to $4 a day. As a spy, you were also paid per mission. If you were like a regular full-time civilian spy, you'd be paid about $50 per mission if you ran into danger on the way and could be potentially executed, imprisoned, any of that. If you operated behind the lines and you told spies where to go, what to wear, you would get paid about $500 per mission, which was actually a very big fee back then, and that was also including your day fee that you'd get. They were actually not very fair when they told you how much you were going to make, because they would sometimes tell you, you're going to make this much a day, but really they'd cut half of that sometimes down to like 50 cents less than what they told you, which is actually a big cut from what they said they would give you.
In the Union, as the war started, the Union didn't have a very organized spy network. Many spies were sent out by certain generals or leaders of the government, and the information wasn't communicated as well as it could have been. One advantage that the Union had was they gained military intelligence from slaves or former slaves. As the war continued, generals had spy masters who organized or gathered information from spy networks. Some famous spy masters were Allen Pinkerton, Lafayette Baker, and George H. Sharp. As the war started, the Confederacy was more organized than the Union. They used people who worked for the army of the government in the North, but were for the South as a way to pass along information. They passed info across the border on the secret line.
The Confederate States Army Signal Corps was a fairly small organization of officers and men. They accomplished tactical and strategic communications for the fighting troops. The CSA-SC also dealt with espionage. They would figure out ways to signal to other spies. They used telegraphs, the wigwag signal, and cipher disks to code and send messages. The telegraph train was introduced at this time to help transport the machines. The wigwag signal was performed in daylight using a flag attached to a hickory stick. Messages were coded into a series of flag motions. Edward Potter Alexander was the CSA-SC Captain of Engineers. He formerly served the Union only to resign and join the Confederacy. The CSI Signal Corps was much smaller than the Union's, although just as important and influential to the outcome of the war.
The Confederate Signal Corps had an intelligence agency known as the Secret Service Bureau, which managed spying operations along the secret line from Washington to Richmond. The Secret Service started in 1861 to 1862, and the leader of the Confederacy was William Norris. Secret Service Bureau, known as SSB, was originally by President Jefferson Davis. Belle Boyd had a big impact in the all-around Civil War. She risked her life to help in the capture of Fort Royal. Henry Thomas Harrison also had a big impact. He helped make Lee's army ready for the Battle of Gettysburg. He told told them who was coming and when and where from.
During the Civil War, spies did everything to hide their identity. This was absolutely crucial to the success of their missions. They would use clothing and makeup to appear to be different people. They would imitate accents, ways of speech, and characters. Spies would disguise themselves as soldiers from the side they were fighting in order to learn about their enemy's tactics and strategies. Women disguised as men, spies disguised as maids and coachmen and nurses and musicians, mostly servants, and these jobs would allow them to overhear conversations. Spies sometimes wore uniforms of their army rather than disguise. If they were caught, what they were wearing actually affected the consequences they would face.
Hundreds of women were involved in the Civil War and were spies in the Civil War. The reason that they would enlist was because they really wanted to help fight for their cause and for their side, because, you know, this is the first time in American history that women have had a significant role in the war. So they just really helped out by doing this, and, you know, even sometimes if they enlisted as a spy but then they were later had to be helped on the field and stuff like that, they would do this even though they didn't have good training. They would actually not be treated any differently. They got paid the same. They would get the same punishments, as in death sometimes, imprisoned, being arrested, and things like that. It did not matter your gender, and it just was all the same because they just wanted to win. That's basically how they would think about this whenever something like this would happen. Women, they would do all the things that men would do as a spy. They'd listen to conversations, they would read through letters that they weren't supposed to, and they would even dress up as well, just like how we talked about disguise. They would dress themselves up as men, and sometimes African American men, and it depends on what they were wearing that they got punished for.
If caught, there is a punishment of death by hanging, but not all spies were executed after caught. Indiscretion of the authority holding them, they might simply be held in custody of the political prisoners or even tried as prisoners of war and exchanged for prisoners held by the other side. According to the website Espionage by Burroughs M. Carnahan, Congress gave U.S. Army courts-martial the power to try and punish by death spies who, in time of war or rebellion, were found in or about forts or camps of the Army. The Confederate States Congress gave Confederate court-martial the same power to punish Union spies. At the time, however, the international military customs allowed spies to be executed without a trial. The total number of executed spies is unknown.
Basically, both sides had a base, as you know, and they would set up there, and that's where they'd have like their meetings and like what they'd discuss what they're doing. Like the spy network for the Confederates was actually set up in Washington, D.C., even though it's not in their homeland, but so that they're closer to what they're trying to spy on. And the Confederate spies included Confederate soldiers, cavalrymen, store owners, or anyone they could get, because Confederates didn't have people enlist in the war as spies. They just took anyone they could possibly get. So a few things they would do, as you know, is disguise, just like maids, stagecoaches, women, men. They disguise themselves as opposite genders sometimes. So the Union actually had a Secret Service bureau, and it had spies all the way from Washington to Richmond, Virginia. And, you know, even the same here, even if someone was like just a regular everyday person that enlisted for the war, sometimes was picked, but there were also jobs as spies with the Union rather than just, you know, just picking people out of the crowd, like, oh, you're a spy now, like stuff like that. Some spies were lucky enough sometimes, you know, being a spy, you really make a commitment, so you have to either stay for months or days or weeks, you know. But so sometimes if you gained enough trust from the other side and they actually thought you were part of their group in fighting, they would sometimes give you a specific job. And if spies were lucky enough, sometimes if they were picked to be messengers, if they were sending messages to other people from the Union or Confederate side, they'd be able to read through all of those messages, and then when they got back to their base or other side, or they could send messages saying what was going to happen, what the other side was planning. And some things that, you know, a woman would do if they were spies is if they had skirts because they were maids or something, they would write messages on the skirts and then send them or even smuggle them to the other like side that they were spying for, because that was other ways to get them sent rather than gaining enough trust to be a messenger or something like that.